welcome to Pause for Payments. I'm Kristy Duncan, and I am truly delighted today to have with me Helen Vowls, who is Director of the CIO/COO Retail Financial Services Practice at Leathwaite, which is an executive search firm, and she's based in London. I've been looking forward to today's discussion as Helen has a tremendous network of leaders and rising stars across the industry, both in London and globally. Welcome, Helen.
Thank you. Hi.
Helen, these are really uncertain times during this global pandemic, and it seems like a risky move to change organizations at this time. Can you share with us some strong reasons why people should consider changing jobs externally right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, if we look at the pandemic and look at how organizations have responded to it, I can completely understand why people have that view. I think what we've seen is during the first couple of months of the pandemic, organizations and the people within them very much being in crisis management mode. So really working out how the heck they were going to get through this. And I can understand why at those times people were very inward focused, pulling together, getting their organization remote and just dealing with what was in front of them on a daily basis. I think what we've seen, I think what people have to remember now is that this is the new normal, and organizations continue to invest in their people, and people are moving internally within organizations. So actually, whilst we're in this modus operandi, you've still got to have one eye on your career. It's very easy when working like this just to kind of deal with the here and now and almost forget about your future career. So I think certainly what we've seen is organizations aren't afraid at the moment to go out and hire good people. And it's good people that they need. I think what this crisis has done is create some new types of roles that are required, perhaps new types of skills within certain roles. So I think, organizations aren't going to bring people on board at the moment on a whim. Any senior hire that needs to be made is done with a huge business case behind it, a lot of due diligence around it. So as much as it is quite a tricky thing to contemplate right now, often these kind of uncertain times are the best times to make a real difference in a firm. And, organizations are looking for new ways to do things, new perspectives. So it's actually, in a weird way, a good time to move, because it's not that like organizations are hiring in droves. They are making very specific hires for very specific reasons. So those hires are crucial to the future of the firm.
So interesting. I love that perspective. Thanks for sharing, Helen. So given that we still haven't found that elusive new normal, it seems things are changing day by day in this pandemic, and every market is doing things a little differently. Can you share some tips on how we might approach a job search outside our organizations in this environment?
So I think everyone's still getting used to this way of working. Ordinarily, you and I would be sat in a room having this discussion, and everyone is getting used to this way of working and have to get used to this way of networking right now. It will come back. We will all be sat in rooms together at some point. Unfortunately, none of us know quite when. But I think it is, if someone is unhappy in their current business, they need to think about elevating themselves and getting back out there and networking. What's really interesting is that when headhunting candidates at the moment, and obviously we do that on a day-to-day basis, it's easier to get in touch with people because everyone's at home. It's easier to get in someone's diary because whilst everyone's operating through Zoom or Teams or whatever, there are gaps in the day, and those gaps tend to be filled or can be filled. So I think it's just having that confidence to reach out to people. You've got the LinkedIns where you can network and what have you, but I think in times like this, people are keen to know what are going on in other organizations. So reaching out to old contacts, former colleagues, they'll all be interested and happy to talk right now. So I think certainly as well for those people that perhaps aren't working at the moment, perhaps they have been made redundant or happen to be out of work or have left somewhere prior to the pandemic, I think and hope that they would find that their network is much more receptive than perhaps previously, because we all know that we all have to pull together in a time like this, but you've got to be proactive. You're not going to bump into someone walking down the street at the moment. You've got to be proactive. You've got to get yourself in people's diaries. But, you know, it's times like this that people come together. So I think just really getting out there and just reaching out to people you know is the way forward. Make, you know, basic things like making sure your LinkedIn profile's up to date and all that kind of good stuff is kind of a given nowadays, but also making sure that you're participating in networking events. We've held a lot more webinars as a business through COVID, and I would say our uptake is probably higher than our uptake was in formal breakfasts in our office or kind of networking evenings. We're getting more people visiting the online events than we were actually in person, because it doesn't take as much time out of your day. So if somebody is interested, get to those networking events, because you don't have to leave home. It's, you know, you log on and it's quite straightforward at the moment.
Yeah, that's great. I love that approach. So what I see in the market is that it's kind of lumpy right now, given that many organizations have given a commitment not to let any of their employees go, which is fantastic, but it may also mean that they're not hiring. But what I'm seeing in Singapore is that some of the banks are hiring like crazy, and DBS Bank in Singapore, for example, is hiring something like 2,000 people. It's a huge opportunity for the market there. Where would you point people to look for career opportunities in this rather unsettled market, Helen?
So I think you're right. It's lumpy. There's no consistency from an organization or a functional perspective. There are certain roles that have really been heightened during this crisis. You know, the functional heads of technology, of operations, of kind of risk, of HR have all had to really pull together to get their companies through the first response to the pandemic. I think in terms of where people need to focus their efforts, it needs to be focused around actually what they want to do. You know, don't focus it around an organization, because different parts of organization will have different plans afoot. It needs to be focused across either a market or a role that they're interested in doing. And look, I'm a massive believer that the right roles find the right people. You know, it's a full-time job to look for a job, but if you're certainly when you're at the senior end of the market, the roles will come to you. You know, I think if you look, obviously I'm based in the UK. If you look in the UK, a couple of our banks are going to be having new CEOs in the next 12 months. That perpetuates change. So keep an eye on those organisations. You know, the capital markets businesses have actually fared okay at the moment, probably better than the retail banks, because trading volumes have been up. So those organisations, you know, there's going to be pockets of those organisations that are hiring. Organisations that are going through integrations, you know, those kind of firms, there's opportunity out of those kind of events. But also look broader, you know, look, we're seeing some people move into different markets right now. Payments taps into so many different industries. You don't have to be solely within a bank or a payments business. You know, you can look much broader than that. So I think you need to make sure your search is driven by the opportunity rather than an organization, and your network will lead you to where those opportunities are.
Yeah, it all comes back to that network somehow, and building your network now, I think, is more important than ever, especially in this environment where people aren't able to get out and go to conferences and you know, do group networking. It's more one-on-one networking. But you're right, the people are open to it, and they're all sitting at home at their desks. So we sometimes have more opportunity and time in our days for networking.
Yeah, and it's being disciplined around it. It's been disciplined around actually putting time aside to do it, which is really easy not to, because it's not part of your day job and something else more important will always come up. But even the intel you can gain from spending half an hour having a virtual coffee with someone is invaluable.
Yeah, I agree. And that's the way you find the opportunities, is just getting out there into the market and digging around. So for those people who may have decided that they prefer to find a new role within their organizations, Helen, what tips would you have for them?
So look, it does come back to networking internally. It's a different kind of networking. We're seeing quite a few organizations, and I'm thinking of a couple of UK ones when I say this, but going through big structural changes right now. Maybe a new leader's come into a new function, into a function. Maybe the business has realigned itself, and organizations at the moment are much more driven to filling roles internally as a first port of call than going externally, just given the market that we're in. So it's a good opportunity to really kind of seek out those internal roles. I think it's really important to continue that internal networking, whether you have internal mentors that you can engage through or just internal networking forums. Every organization now should have some kind of diversity and inclusion forum. And that's a really good starting point, particularly for our audience here. So it's really kind of making sure that you're in touch with the parts of an organization you need to be in touch with, depending on the role you do, to make sure that when a new opportunity comes up, the head of that area taps you on the shoulder and not somebody else. You've obviously got the formal routes, you know, internal job boards and all of that kind of stuff, but actually what you really want is the person that's maybe setting up a new function, restructuring the function, to actually tap you on the shoulder.
Yeah, indeed. And then building your profile so that these people are aware of you. You know, if you're more junior in your career, just starting out, then building that industry profile, either internally in your organization, but also outside your organization, that can be a challenge too. Do you have any tips there? How do you get noticed?
I think it is a challenge. And I think it's not something that women in particular put themselves forwards for. Probably less. I think actually it's becoming a lot better. But it's probably something that men naturally do better than women. That's a sweeping generalization, but I think it is relatively true. I think you've got to have the confidence to do it, and that can come down to an internal mentor helping you with that. Most organizations should now have internal mentor schemes. And I think the more junior you are, sometimes you don't have the confidence or the belief that you've something to offer externally. So I think your internal mentor plays a huge part in that. I think kind of also looking above and beyond your role. As I said before, very easy at the moment to get stuck into your day-to-day role, but actually looking above and beyond that and thinking, well, where else in the organization can I add value? You know, if you've done a specific degree that perhaps taps into another part of the organization, can you add value over there? So it's really making sure that you've got to have some self-discipline around pushing yourself out there. But I would say don't be afraid to lean on more senior people within the organization, because it's part of their job as a role model to kind of really help the more junior people come through. And it's great when we see more junior candidates and more junior employees come to us and actually put themselves forward for things, but I don't think it happens as much as it should do.
That's great advice. And I wish I had that, 20 years ago in my career. I think my career would have looked much different had I had that guidance. So that's great. Something else that you probably have some familiarity with, and again, I wish I had known about earlier in my career, is the whole concept of global mobility. And I personally, from what I see, from my vantage point, is that people who have experience in more than one geography and more than one market can bring a whole lot more to a role because they've got more of an understanding of different ways of doing things in different markets, and they can share different ideas and different approaches and understanding. But would you have any thoughts on how those types of international postings might help and build someone's career, and how we go about looking for them?
Yeah, so absolutely, I completely agree. They more than help build someone's career. Just that different perspective, broader appreciation of cultural values, how to operate in Asia versus in the UK versus in the States. Hugely, hugely important. And I think what people often don't do is make it widely known that they're open to that. You know, often it happens that whereby a role comes up and someone is asked would they be open to it, but I think people need to make it known that they are open to it. I think it's very easy for organizations, particularly if their employees are female, to say, well, they're going to have a baby or they've just had a baby, maybe they wouldn't want to move. And I think with the backing of a large organization, that move can be made really quite seamlessly. And look, when we run a search for a firm, we pretty much always run a global search. So, you know, if we're working for big multinational organizations, we don't constrain our research to the country that role will sit in. We look globally, and organizations find it really attractive, and perhaps it's bringing someone home from an overseas stint, or you know, taking someone out of one country into another that isn't home. You know, I think having that global experience is hugely beneficial. And there's always a reason not to go, whether it be family, kids' education, wrong time, husband's jobs, wife's jobs. There's always a reason not to go. But I think if you can make it work, you absolutely should. Because if you look at the really senior people in a lot of the firms that you and I know, they've not constrained their career to one country. And I think particularly people who grow up within national organizations. So say if you're in a UK bank, your ability to kind of elevate your career will really come with getting experience in an international bank.
Yeah, so lots of opportunities. How to find them may be a challenge, but from what I see, it's often easier to get a transfer internally across borders than moving to a new organization in a new country.
Yeah, I think that's probably true, because normally there's a sponsorship piece required there, and your current company is more likely to follow that through for you. I certainly think when we're looking globally, we don't let any kind of nationality dictate whether we pick the phone up to someone. You know, it's very much who is right for the role, and we've certainly moved many people across the globe who've needed visa sponsorship, and families relocating, kids' education sorted, and obviously big organizations have their own relocation specialists that support people through that. So I think, yes, there is a trend to do it with your own company, but I've certainly seen many people, you know, be in a local business and then be tapped on the shoulder and taken overseas by another firm. So, you know, if you're approached about a role overseas, I would say don't close off your ears to it until you've heard the full story, and look at the role beyond that role, because that's the stepping stone that kind of experience allows you is phenomenal.
Yeah, all good points. Thanks for that. Lastly, Helen, our audience is primarily women. Can you share your thoughts on why this industry needs women and what strengths that women bring to the table, where they can focus when building careers in payments and fintech?
Yeah, sure. I think we all know that we operate in quite a male world here, and it will take time to change that. And we are bringing women through organizations, but what those women need to see is role models at the top. And we are getting there. You know, there are senior women in really cool positions right now in fintechs, payments firms, banks. And I think they genuinely do realize what a role model they are, and they're very passionate about bringing female talent through. For an organization to be successful, you've got to have diversity of thought, and, you know, a man and a woman think very differently. It's just kind of the way we're inbuilt. It's nothing to do with how we've been brought up. It's just the way we are. So having a male perspective and a female perspective on exactly the same topic from two people who could have done exactly the same role, you'll still get different perspectives. And I think also, as you're bringing women through an organization, you do need female leadership as well. To understand, you know, some of the challenges that women go through in their career. You know, they are the ones that go off and have families, and have to then deal with coming back into the workplace, which is a huge challenge in itself. So I think having those senior women above them is really, really important. You know, there's nothing worse than looking at the board of an organization on the internet and just seeing a whole bunch of white males on the leadership, and unfortunately you do still see that, but I think it is being challenged. However, having said that, we do need men in the room to help us change that perspective. This isn't about, you know, male versus female. You do absolutely need both in the room to change it and to challenge it. But it's crucial because you just need that diversity of perspective.
Yeah, I love that. The diversity is really, really important, whether it's gender diversity or ethnic diversity or, you know, sexual orientation. There's so many different strands of diversity, and bringing more diversity to leadership teams and teams in general can really help us to see different perspectives of our employee base, our shareholder base, our stakeholders, at all corners. So these are great perspectives, Helen. Thank you so much. I love this. I love the idea of looking at different roles, of looking at payments in a broad perspective, because there's more than just one way to look at payments. It's not just in a bank or in a network, but it could be as a user in a capacity in one of the merchants or service providers out in the market. But also the concept of networking, both internally and externally, is hugely important, and perhaps more so now in this coronavirus environment where we've got perhaps fewer opportunities, well, far fewer opportunities to network face to face. So we really need to take some time out to make sure that we do that. But I like your message. Go ahead.
I think in particular within your own organization, it's quite easy to forget about people at the moment, because unless you happen to be on a Zoom call with someone or in a town hall with someone, you know, that person that you used to see in the corridor for a coffee and say hi to and how you're doing, what's your day like, what are you doing at the moment, those conversations are being missed. So where you may be networking without realizing, you're not doing that at the moment. So that, I think that's really tough in this environment.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Those water cooler discussions or beers after work are really no longer happening. So we do need to be more deliberate about it and actually make time for it. And in theory, we should have time for it because we're no longer commuting. We're no longer going out for lunch or out for drinks after work. So in theory, we should have more time to do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
The idea of role models is good, especially at senior levels. I think women, having more women at senior levels in organizations has been proven to increase employee engagement and hopefully dispel the whole concept of the stale male pale leadership at some organizations that still sometimes persists. So thanks so much for sharing your thoughts, Helen. It's been great having you on today. I'm going to encourage our audience to join us online for the many other Pause for Payments webinars that we're running weekly on industry topics and career topics, having great conversations with amazing women leaders like Helen from around the world, and building our global community across the payments ecosystem. So thanks for listening today.
My pleasure.